very pleased to be joined again by Philip Lewis, the Director of Research, Intelatus, to discuss the emerging U.S. wind market, U.S. offshore wind market. Phil, you recently wrote a report for two of our titles, Maritime Reporter and Offshore Engineer, what to expect from the U.S. offshore wind market this year. You seem more optimistic about U.S. offshore wind. Why is that?
Oh, no, thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me back. You're right. I mean, we've written those articles for you that are going to come in the magazine, but you know what's behind those is our monthly report that we do on the US wind market, the US offshore wind market. So we're following this as it develops, and it really does merit a monthly report and review of what's going on. There have been lots of announcements over the years. There's been lots of excitement about US wind. I think last year, and especially for the overseas investors and supply chain, the current administration, the federal administration statement of a target of 30 gigawatts by 2030 and a longer term aim of 110 gigawatts by 2050 sent really positive signals to the market. Now that's been backed up by the procurement goals of individual states in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, where the states have not only just said, we're going to buy a certain percentage of our power as renewables, they've specifically identified offshore wind goals, and they've been buying against that. So you've got the government creating the opportunity by giving the land, the space on which to develop these wind farms. And then you've got the states procuring. Now that's not different this year. That's been going on for some time. What's different is it's the government that does the permitting of the project. So a project might have a procurement, but it can't build it unless the federal authorities, in this case BOEM, with its range of stakeholders, said, "Yep, you can go ahead and build the wind farm." And that really wasn't happening. That was the environmental reviews were taking a long time. There were lots of objections, and they just weren't happening. So the federal authorities have adopted one of the federal infrastructure project review processes, FAST-41, and used it with the offshore wind projects. And we're seeing them getting approved. So two have now been permitted, reached final investment decision, and broken ground. There's a whole bunch of others, 10 others that are in federal permitting. The next permits will be issued, in theory, in 2023. And there's going to be multiple projects then approved in 23, 24, if it follows the timetable. What that then means is we go from famine to feast of activity, where there is nothing to everything. And if you want to see where there's an indicator of the interest in offshore wind, probably we only just have to look back to the recent New York Bight auction. Now that auction took 3 days. It was for 6 leases, and the prices paid were, in our views, quite high, exceptionally high. In fact, some developers, such as Ørsted, said we're not going to carry on with the auctions because the price is too high for these projects to make money. But projects have secured the leases at quite high lease payments to the government as options to develop these sites. Now, what that means is they've got to then go ahead and develop them. They've got to find procurements for them, but it's creating that longer term pipeline, and the government is committing to further auctions. It's put out a timetable that takes us out 2024, 2025. We'll see Central Atlantic, we'll see the Gulf of Mexico, we'll see the West Coast coming up, Gulf of Maine. So we're going to see several auctions that are just going to add to that base and the enthusiasm. Plus that, you've got some of these factories that the Biden administration has said we want local factories, local jobs. There have been commitments to these factories, and we've gone from nothing to quite a few of the major components having local either complete factories or finishing factories, where there's some work done overseas and some work done in the States. So yeah, general grounds to say that things are moving.
What do you see as the obstacles for growth?
I think that is a very good question. You know, those with a longer memory about US Wind will remember Cape Wind of it was many moons ago that it was approved, it was going to go ahead, but it had a lot of objections to that. And the wind farms that have been approved, particularly Vineyard, faces legal objections, not to the developer, but to BOEM and the federal authorities for how they're using the review process. You have it from the fishing industry, and you also have it from local residents using different reasons, but they are challenging BOEM's process for that. Now, BOEM is dealing with that in guidance to developers and working up programs with developers to address this, but always legal challenges have a potential to upset the apple cart. You never know until they're finally resolved. People seem to be generally confident, but as I say, in the US legal system, we don't know until the outcome. So we've got to keep a watching view on that. I think also I mentioned this FAST 41. This is a tool, basically a tool for government infrastructure projects to allow them to be accelerated in their environmental review with NEPA and the NEPA process. Well, that is being challenged for these projects. And so we have a whole bunch of these projects which are under that title and are expected to be pushed forward. And well, that could be challenged. And so that may change. And again, it depends how the makeup of the House after the midterms and the Senate and the coming forward, how that goes on. One thing that links to that I guess political equation is the federal investment taxes and the tax credits. It's basically something that helps an offshore wind developer make money on his project. So those are available for projects that start construction by the end of 2025-26. But given the federal review process and the delays that's been there, there's actually now a whole bunch of projects that are squeezing up that are going to then attack what's called the tax equity market. That's a specific feature of the US renewable market of how you get project financing. And if you attack that market with a huge amount of demand in one go, rather than feeding demand through to the market, obviously you might not be able to meet that demand for finance. And also, once those credits expire, the projects that are coming in, like through the New York Bight auction or the California auction that's coming up later this year, who's to say that they're going to get the federal taxes? Now, there are pushes to see some state taxes, and there are some state taxes that help developers, but there will be a debate, through the American houses around those tax credits. They were in the original administration's plans. They've not been approved at the moment, so they're still being debated. That could solve it. And then I would say Jones Act. That could really impact things, especially with how things are developing at the moment.
As you also well know, the Jones Act and its potential impact on the growth of U.S. offshore wind, i.e. the availability of vessels to do the job, is another pervasive line of discussion. When you look at the Jones Act and its impact on U.S. offshore wind, what do you see there as the challenges and the opportunities?
I think that, as you said there, it's challenges and opportunities. The Jones Act is a fact. One has to live with it, and the oil and gas industry has been clearly living with it for years, with both locally flagged Jones Act compliant vessels, locally built, locally manned, locally owned, but also foreign flag vessels for the specialist requirements, where it doesn't make economic sense for the domestic supply chain to invest in those. So as long as those rulings are followed in the offshore space, then in theory, that people know how to plan, and you can see that happening. There are those developers who are going down the Jones Act compliant route, where they want Jones Act vessels. For instance, Dominion with their coastal Virginia project, they've taken the decision to invest in a wind turbine installation vessel. Now, that's the only wind turbine installation vessel in the US market at the moment. When I say that, Jones Act compliant. That will be ready to do the coastal Virginia job, but it's also being used by Ørsted in a couple of their projects as well. but it's available for all projects in the market. So some developers have then said, well, we're not going to build a Jones Act vessel because they're actually quite expensive. They're a good 30% premium to a South Korean built wind turbine installation vessel, for instance. And also the manning requirements are different, and that adds cost to the project. So we'll just station that offshore, and we'll feed that with feeder spreads coming from US ports that are Jones Act compliant. Now, there are debates around the feeder solution, whether it's appropriate or not. In the oil and gas industry, you have a mix of tugs and barges and lift boats. The lift boats of the oil and gas industry are generally too small for the new generation turbine components that we're seeing that are going to be used on US offshore wind projects, because these are the biggest, not unlike the demonstrators that were built a few years ago, which could rely heavily on Jones Act vessels. And if you use a tug and barge spread, you're double handling very sometimes delicate components like the blades, which are easily to damage. You're very weather dependent, and you're probably going to see higher downtime or worse productivity because of it. So there are some feeder solutions coming out, but none are, I say, none are fully mature yet. But there are some feeder solutions trying to address this motion compensation. So we have those two camps. We have we'll go with Jones Act vessels, or we'll go with foreign flag vessels. But let's look at what's being built Jones Act. As I said, there's one wind turbine installation vessel, no foundation installation vessels, no heavy lift vessels for substations or foundations. And the heavy lift fleet of the US, it just doesn't have the big capacity that's required. We don't have cable layers. I mean, there's one or two barges you can use, but none of the big capacity cable layers. They can be foreign flag, and they are likely to be foreign flag for most of the projects. We've seen one scour protection vessel committed, a second one as an option, and for the construction site, that's it. So 2 vessels firm. Now that's not what the government was hoping for. And you can see there's some legal changes coming up now that are being discussed about the manning requirements for offshore projects, offshore wind and offshore oil and gas, which change decades-long principles where you can use foreign crew on your vessels. The amendments under discussion are either US crew, green card holders, or nationals of the flag of the vessel. And that is going to pose a particular challenge to offshore wind construction. So we'll see where that goes. So Jones Act, we're just going to have to keep watching and watching and watching. There are requests made to the CBP to make the Customs and Border Patrol, to make rulings on the interpretations of the Jones Act, and we'll see those ongoing. And again, we're just monitoring that on a monthly basis. We won't go into all the details of all the rulings because that starts to get technical detail here. But obviously, anybody who wants to find out about that in the monthly report from Intelatus Global Partners, we have that in our report. Monthly, we just follow all those changes and developments.
Floating wind, while it's still on the horizon, it's approaching fast. When you look at floating wind versus fixed bottom, what are the different challenges and opportunities?
Oh, well, yeah, I think a lot of people aren't looking at this. A lot of people are surprised to actually hear there are 4 projects under development in the US at the moment for floating wind, 2 on the East Coast, which again surprises people, and 2 on the West Coast. The government is also putting out leasing this year for California, which is going to be all floating, but there are East Coast, Gulf of Mexico, and West Coast leases coming up, which will all be floating. Now, why is floating different? You don't build them the same way that you build bottom fixed offshore wind farms, where you just build all the components together, you take them offshore and you install them with these specialist vessels for bottom fixed vessels. Floating wind is more akin to the floating structures that you see in the Gulf of Mexico that are anchored more to the seabed. But if you think you put a big production semi out in the Gulf of Mexico, or a spar or a TLP, well, a spar, let's say, you might have 16 mooring lines, 16 anchors. You've got a kilometer, 2 kilometers per anchor line of mooring chain. That's fine. For the similar sort of investment in a floating wind project, you might get 50 to 100 turbines. each of those need 3 mooring lines, minimum 3 to 6 if you're going for redundancy, and they're anchors. So what that's putting is a whole supply chain around supplying moorings. So anchors, all the different types of anchors, mooring chain, mooring wire, synthetic rope, but it also means the vessels that install them. And we're doing a lot of analysis on this. And in our report, in our next month's report, we're doing a special on floating wind. We're looking at, what that actually means for, well, the ports, which is a big constraint because these are big pieces that ports are going to have to deal with. And there are limits in the US, major limits there. And so investment needs to be made and quickly. And then in the fleet, the type of vessels, yes, they're anchor handlers. Yes, they're MPSVs. Yes, the US has them, but they just don't have the right type and the right number. These are the biggest, and they are the most challenging types of vessels, and there just aren't enough. Now, when the US gets busy, Europe's getting busy with floating wind, Asia's getting busy with floating wind, and these anchor handlers and MPSVs are supporting the oil and gas industry, which is also busy because of the high oil and gas prices. So the demand for these assets is very tight. So we're going to see tightness in supply, probably insufficient demand. Something's got to give. Either there's got to be, there's going to be new building, there's going to be spikes in prices, there's going to be delays, but there are opportunities that come with it. So, but it's just about being ready and understanding what those opportunities. And as I say, a lot of people are looking at that. We're looking at that in real detail. I mean, we've obviously got a very strong marine focus, ports and marine focus as a company. So although we're looking at the whole manufacturing side in the yards, we're looking at the port side and the vessels. And it's in those areas we see some real bottlenecks and challenges, and we really encourage people to take a look at our analysis, because there's some good insights into there about where some of these challenges, but also where the opportunities are.